Hello, hello. Alrighty, we're gonna begin our finance committee meeting. Thanks for everybody coming, everybody that can be here. We're gonna start with a roll call. Do we have someone that can do roll?
Chairman Smith. Finance Committee Chairman Doherty.
Here.
Mrs. Black.
Here.
Mr. Connor. Mr. Groan.
Here.
Ms. Haddon.
Here.
Mrs. Jones.
Present.
Mr. Kuhn. Here. Mrs. Schaefer.
Here.
Mr. Slater.
Here.
Ms. Thomas.
Here.
Superintendent Dr. Robertson.
Here.
Thank you. I want to begin with laying this out. My goal is to end at 7:30 p.m. tonight with a hard stop. I know we've all got kids and we want to get home, so I want to be mindful of that. So regardless of where we are in discussions, I'm going to do a hard stop then, so I can put my kids to bed. I did want to begin. Has everybody met with Mary Ellen, Justin, and no? Okay. Well, this will be helpful then for anybody that hasn't had their one-on-one to talk about just the revenues, projections, where we're going. So I did want to ask to begin with that and kind of go a high-level overview.
It's fine. We're gonna hard stop tonight. So here's updated calendar, and I know we spoke fully about this of moving the voting date to May 8th. I've got a clarifying question from Chairman Doherty earlier. You'll have the full budget, or at least 85% of it baked by the first week of April. So this gives you a full month to like really dig into that. The voting is just going to happen in May. We expect county commission typically the end of May, sometimes even into June. Last year was into June. So that gives us plenty of time to work with them on getting where we need to be.
And just so we, the Thursday meeting, what we'll bring to you, we'll bring you the projections for the kind of other revenue sources. So it'll show you like what we're projecting for the federal, and again, it's early, but we haven't gotten awards, but it'll just kind of be our best guess on some of those things. So we'll go over that on Thursday, and have that kind of laid out for you, as well as, you know, kind of some updated revenue projections, because we're still, again, working those. Like, look at them frequently to see if there's any adjustments, if there's any new changes. We'd see that on Thursday. And so I think we want to kind of dig into the local revenue, because I mean, basically, you know, we've got the grants fund, and I guess that's what we'll talk about. But when we look at local revenue, operating revenues, local revenue, and TISA, which is the state piece. So those are our two biggest revenue sources. So this is a chart that some of you may have seen, and it's kind of looking at what was our 24 actual, and then what we approved for 25. And when we built the 25 approved, it was based on our approved 24 budget. When we got to the end of the year, the actual 24 was less than what we had projected. Sales tax had slowed more than we had expected. We knew there was some, but it didn't hit quite the numbers we were hoping. And then property tax was lower, primarily due to the equalization they have to do for business taxes compared to personal property taxes, since personal property taxes are only increased every 4 years. So when we're looking at what we think we're going to get in for 25, in total, these are the local revenues that, when you talk about maintenance of effort, that's the set of revenue options. And looking at it, it'll be about $7 million less than what we put in the approved budget.
Question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, from a staffing perspective, our operating budget projected for next year is what, 300 million?
For 26, yes.
For 26.
Mhm.
Our maintenance of effort through the county is 272?
Well, right now it's 279 is what it is, but if we adjusted to if we reduced it to what we think it's going to be, it'd be 272.
Has there ever been a scenario or a year in historical times where we have, in terms of that staffing model budget, the 300 million that's allocated, has that ever stayed within the maintenance of effort? So for example, has there ever been a scenario in which that has happened? I'm just curious for context.
We'd have to go back. We'd have to go back and look. I think the thing to consider here is that 2 years ago, TISA completely flipped on its head the funding model, meaning we used to get funded at 55%, 60% locally, meaning, that 277 was 50%, 55% of our budget, and BEP made up 45%. Now, right now, we expect our local contribution to only be 37% of our budget, right? So that 277 now is a much smaller portion of our budget than it was under BEP, which was intentional because BEP, did not fund large urban districts. In fact, our district was part of a lawsuit for a minute around BEP funding. So the correction the state has made is recognizing that TISA, needs to fund school districts equitably across the state. And it's corrected some of the things that BEP fell short on.
Okay.
And you're talking about like the staffing model, kind of trying to line it up with the local.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this staffing model, this has only been in place kind of since TISA. It was a change that we made. It wasn't done in the structure that fully,
Yeah.
invested the resources or will.
And maybe it's wishful thinking, but what I'm getting at is like if there ever was a scenario in which the teachers and every supplemental staff, that budget was within our maintenance of effort, and that would eliminate any cuts, right? In theory.
Well, if you lower the staffing budget, you're making cuts.
Right. You'd have to, but what I'm getting at is, it seems like you've gotten, that's what I was trying to ask for historical context. Have we gotten beyond where it was guaranteed, and now we're at this place where we've got to figure out other revenue sources to make up for the additional needs?
Yeah, no, I understand the question you're asking. I think what we're trying to do in this budget, and as we've had conversations, is protect the school staffing, right? Of trying to create a budget scenario where we can get to a good place without harming what we have done at the school building. We've been very intentional over the last 3 years to say our goal is to push as many resources directly into schools to support kids and support teachers as well as we can. And so the staffing model, yes, it is more than the 277. That's all going to schools. And so, that is a conversation, but it's been an intentional move to say we want as much of this going to schools as we can.
Yeah. Thank you. Understand.
I was just going to add, and I've mentioned this before, so thinking about these dollars, under BEP, it's the easiest way to think about it. Under BEP, we were funded for X number of teachers, but we funded X plus Y, right? Because this community wanted lower student-to-teacher ratios. That was a huge priority. And so under BEP, we were 320 teachers more. TISA funds by student, but you can draw some equivalency there. So thinking like, where do you cut? Like the place to look is often the teachers that we are over. Does that make sense? Like it can be staff in general, but where we are over staffed is in that teacher core based on the ratios that are coming from the state. That's a decision we made, right? That's a decision we made. And I think it's a decision that our county appreciates, wants, has asked for. But when we think about this number, to the points that you're making, part of that decision is to put those ratios where they are right now.
And to be clear, just for everybody's own understanding, 126 is that for kindergarten?
No, 1 to 20.
I know, but state, like there's
State 1 to 25.
is it 125? Okay, and we're far below that.
That's right.
Right,
That's
I'm with you.
Yeah.
And so, again, looking at, where we are today, we're trying to both, figure out what does the rest of 25 look like. So, for sales tax, we've got 6 months. Sales tax is 2 months behind. Sales tax was down. So November and December was actually less than it was the year before. That's the first time since I've been here that sales tax has decreased. It was growth was slowing. Now it's gone the other way. I'm hoping that was a blip, but until I see like the next month of revenue, that's what we're trying to see. It's like, what's the sales tax trend? We look at what was in the governor's budget, I think it's a little over 2%. The state projections for 26 is 2 to 4%. But again, it just depends what the economy does. So that piece of the budget. And then property tax comes down to, how much growth there is, new buildings, what's done with the, reappraisal year. So there's, again, a lot of kind of unknowns, and that's what we're trying to work through. I have frequent meetings with the county, looking at what they're thinking the numbers are gonna be. So that's the kind of the pieces going into here. The investment income, what are the interest rates gonna do? So those are smaller dollars, but again, every dollar we're looking at to see, what that does. And then TISA is another thing, we'll talk about this again some more on Thursday, just what's the current TISA projection. But those are the two pieces. Again, there's an amount that the governor projected, and as we've talked about, there's some final piece on fiscal capacity that helps determine what's our actual number when it takes the formula, less the local share to determine what portion does the state fund. So then kind of taking that, so revenue is one piece of the challenge. We thought digging into the staffing model a bit, because we know there's a lot of questions around that. So we wanted to talk through this. And I do want to mention one thing, that there is other school staffing outside the staffing model. So I don't think we've actually called that out specifically. We talked about XED, that there's the programs, so the multi-exceptionality classroom, the IDS classroom, those are outside the staffing model. Gifted teachers are outside of the staffing model. So there's other school-based costs that are done outside the staffing model, that they're just, bookkeepers or certain things like that. So we just want to let you know that there are other costs, and then obviously transportation, custodial, those things are all done outside that. So that's where those other costs, when you say, there's 300 million, there's this revenue, where are those other costs? They're out there.
I'll go over this slide really briefly. Most of you have already seen this, but it is the actual number of students that are enrolled versus projection. And you see the decrease in projections over time because of that 2021 school year where we saw a bump during COVID. So that 4-year average has rolled off. And so looking at this school year in particular, we had 42,102 actual students in our building. This is minus charter schools, but we staffed them at 43,212. And that's, that's on purpose, but this is a projection. But those projections to actuals we think are getting closer together. So you can see next year we're at that 42,483. The only other thing I would say about this slide is that the high school number is deceiving at 1 to 32 because CTE teachers are outside of that model. So the CTE teachers are at a 1 to 20 or 1 to 25 depending on what they're teaching. So that pulls that number way down. So I just wanted to note that because it looks higher than it is in reality.
So in this slide, and again, many of you have seen it, but just want to clarify what we're looking at. We're looking at staffing trends across the last 4 fiscal years. So you see a big jump in FY23 to FY24, specifically looking at that light blue line. That's our overall staffing. And so you see it jump from 4671 to 5200. The green line is the school-based staff. And then the purple line at the bottom is the central operations staff. Noting that, school-based staff represents 90% of our people. National average for central operations about 9 to 12%. We're at 8%, and consistently try to stay there. So when you think about kind of reductions across the staffing model, what it looks like in terms of how it impacts school-based versus central operations, we're looking at about 88 positions, which is 2% of the school-based staff, and then approximately 20 positions in central operations, which would be about 5% of central operations staff. Said this to many of you, these reductions are, especially in central operations, are getting to positions that are going to impact outcomes. And I've given you examples of those, but I don't think it's, I think it's really important for us to recognize that we are below the national average in central operations. There is not a lot of fat to cut here. And so we are looking at those adjustments for this year. Hopefully over the next month, we'll get to those places where we can talk specifics about what positions those are. I fully expect, obviously, the school-based positions those will happen through attrition retirements, right? The 20 at central operations can't confirm that now. The majority of them probably will, but we've got to really dig in and make some hard decisions about what that looks like.
And so as we look at our budgets, healthcare costs it's a national challenge that we're seeing, and you know, we're not immune to that. So we've been talking about that. We'll be talking about that throughout all of our meetings, and what can we do to do that. You know, we look at our healthcare costs as an important part of our retention and recruitment effort. You know, we have some great benefits, and that does a lot, and it helps keep our teachers healthy and in the classroom. When we look at, you know, national trends have seen year-over-year increases. That is the top line on this chart. The bottom line is what our actual increases, and this looks at just, you know, the per employee cost increase, not necessarily our total cost of providing our programs. We've used our clinics and our pharmacy to help mitigate the cost increase. So that middle line would be what it would have been if we hadn't had those. So again, it helps us not have to pay as much for a particular pharmaceutical, and it also helps our employees because they are able to get less expensive treatment by using our pharmacy and clinic. So we think it's been a really important part of it. You know, we having it implemented during COVID made some challenges, and we didn't get kind of some of that increased improvement that we hoped as fast, but we're really starting to see that now. So we're up to like 64% utilization of our pharmacy. So that's really helping us save costs every year. But again, we have to look at that and figure out how do we fund that. We're looking at ways to mitigate costs in the future, but that does take time because we have to do it if it's a part of a plan change. You have to do that during the open enrollment process so everybody's aware of that when they choose their new insurance. So some things you wouldn't be able to see savings until January, and then also projecting the roll-off of timing of claims and everything. So there's a lot. We got an actuary that's running numbers constantly, trying to figure out, you know, trying to get the closest number we can so we know what that costs are. In addition to healthcare, we have general operational costs, and really, I think the big point we're trying to make here is that the revenue is not keeping up with the cost of increases. So healthcare is a big piece, but just general operating increases. So people are a huge part of the budget, but the stuff that we have to pay for. So the contracts for buses, the custodial. So we outline a few of those costs here to show just those specific things that we're projecting as part of next year's budget. But again, to cover those and to cover the healthcare costs, and when our revenues are not as strong especially in sales tax that we've seen, there's a gap, and that's why we're looking at you know, reducing central office positions. We're looking at what are things that we can, you know, delay, or that we can say, you know, this is a really great thing. Can we do less of it? Again, it's looking at every rock. So we're having conversations constantly with budget managers. I'm looking for options like, hey, can we reduce this part of the budget a little bit? Get in more aggressive contract negotiation, pushing our vendors to see, can we, you know, just like we did with our custodial RFP. You know, we were able to get more savings than if we had continued with our current contract. So, you know, but there's things that just go up. Our insurance, there's about a 20% increase in just, you know, covering the property insurance on all of our buildings, and our vehicle insurance, and our liability. So again, those all go into a factor of when we bring the budget for you, we'll have those all figured in there, but we're also looking at, again, places where we can reduce the budgets. So that's kind of just a few things we just wanted to, you know, put on the table for the discussion. Like you said, you'll eventually get the big budget book with line item details showing by school, showing by department, but we want to kind of just get some initial things out there while we continue to, you know, have conversations in the background, look at, again, the revenue side of the equation, and look for opportunities.
We got a couple questions. Mrs. Black.
Okay, I wanted to go back a couple of pages because I want to be really clear, because a lot of times the public doesn't know what we're asking them to spend their dollars on, right? So when you go to the ratios that we have, like K through 3, 4 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12, I'd like to see, like, what are the numbers for those grade bands as far as the state's requirements, like the maximum requirements. So, like in kindergarten, it's what? 1 to 25? And is that through all the way through third grade? Are the bands the same? Yeah. Okay. And so in fourth and fifth, the ratio,
1 to 30.
1 to 30, okay? And 6 to 8,
Confirming that.
yeah.
And in high school, I think it's 35.
4 to 6 is 30, 7 to 12 is 35.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So I just wanted to be clear about that so that when we talk to the general public, small class sizes is something that's important to everybody. It's something that everybody talks about. It's something that everyone knows is beneficial for the educator and the student. And I just want people to see that what we are investing our money in and what we've already achieved in Hamilton County, that we're already doing better at every single grade band on the ratios that are required of us. We don't have like the maximum number of kids in each classroom. That in general, we are doing a good job of having smaller class sizes than we're required to have. And that's part of the investment of local dollars that we're asking taxpayers to make. That's what they're getting for their money. We're already doing this. And so I just wanted to be clear about what the numbers are, because the general public doesn't necessarily know what these grade band numbers are. And so I just wanted to show folks that, like, this is what we're already getting for our money, and it's something that we've already said that our community prioritizes and that we want. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Mrs. Schaefer?
I know we talked about it earlier, but just going to go ahead and make my ask now. Looking at the budget in athletics. So we don't have the study yet, but we do know that it does recommend a flat rate. And actually, over time, it's easier to project flat rates in the budget season. And this hasn't been changed since the schools merged, the city and the county merged. This has been a very outdated funding formula for coaching supplements. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that we get the numbers on what it would be to do those flat bands for athletics.
Mr. Graham? Larry?
What is keeping us from lowering our student-teacher ratio?
Lowering it or raising it?
Lowering it to like 1 to 18.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
it's money.
And,
But to be honest, you get into a conversation there also, and you know this better than most, of like, at what point is there a diminishing return on that investment? Like, what's the difference between 1 to 17 and 1 to 19? You know, is that worth the $5 million it would cost us? Does that make sense?
well, considering that, acknowledging that we are having some academic growth, but in a lot of our schools, we're not significantly reducing the gap between achievement gap on TCAPs between white and Hispanic and white and black, especially our black students. So it's like, I believe it was 2003, 2004, around that time, Benwood was going to give an $8 million grant to 5 schools. And 2 years after that 5-year program, they pulled their money because they saw no results.
Well, let me
Or
historically
few,
correct.
not enough results.
They didn't pull their money because there was a second. What ended up happening is the grants ran out. But I think your point is actually spot on, right? Of like, what are we doing? You want to talk about it?
I'm not sure if you want. I think when I look for a comparable stat, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but in the last 4 years in Hamilton County, 4 years ago we had 11 CSI schools or priority schools. Now we have 4. And I could detail like how did we get there, and there's a whole bunch of factors. But I think the point you're making is like, are our resources producing growth, producing outcomes where they should? And I think we can look at the reduction of CSI schools to say, at our highest need schools, our lowest achieving schools, we've moved several of them off of that list and are continuing to support them, and we need to continue to invest, right? So I don't know if that
Yeah,
goes.
point is several of those schools were the original Benwood
Yes.
schools, right? And so we did learn, I would argue, we learned a lot from that Benwood initiative that we're actually funding now in GP to get similar results in terms of moving kids forward. And I mean, what we're seeing in the K through 2 space with the tutoring.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I got here 5 years ago, Dr. Johnson said, tell me what you need. Give it to me. And so there was a whole bunch of things. Differentiated compensation was on there. Tutoring was on there. Managing the staffing model differently was on there. There's a whole bunch of different things that we looked at and have been able to fund through a series of different things. But it's exactly this, trying to pour additional resources. What he's referencing is Literacy First. You know, Literacy Now is our K-2 initiative district-wide. Literacy First is in Midtown and Missionary Ridge, high dosage tutoring for our K-2 is showing really significant results, but it's one-to-one. It's a one-to-one, 30 minutes every single day. But the goal is to prevent gaps from the very beginning. It's not just gap closure, it's gap prevention from the very beginning, and we're seeing significant growth already in our first, this is the first year with those 12 schools. Second year, East Side, and they're continuing to grow. So where we're investing in our high need spaces, we are seeing gains, I guess is what.
Well, I concede that we're seeing some growth, but that growth is nowhere near what's going to, and I completely understand the argument that if you can't read at grade level at X grade, you can still read, but the higher the level of reading, the lower the capability level, the less comprehension there is. So, you know, it is important for students to be reading at grade level. And it's like, I can only find 2 years on the state dashboard, data download, of what we spend per student in each of our schools. I'd like to know how long we've done that and achieved very little academic growth. And, you know, this is important to me because my experience, at least most of my teaching career, was at schools with low achievement, schools that would get a letter grade of D, you know, where we're taking these students where they are and trying to use techniques to push them along as quickly as possible. I mean, try teaching science, like chemistry and physics and earth science, when, you know, your average reading level in the class is 3 or 4 grades below the textbook they're using. So you have to modify your classes to do a lot of on-hand work, you know, to be able to get these, you know, what the goals we want our students to be able to do across. So, you know, and I'll get on my soapbox on this, I would rather see fewer admin and more teachers. How many directors do we need funded by federal grants whose position may go away, but the person stays? And we keep building this. And Dr. Robertson, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're okay with a 4 or 5 or 6% increase in admin staff, and yet for years this school district has been bleeding students.
I want to stop because I'm running.
There's a lot of different things.
I can't forget,
Yeah.
like, you're asking so many questions, I'm going to have a hard time keeping up with them. So one, I want to point out, we have been growing and improving. Like, the moving 7 schools off of that list is better than anyone in the entire state. Like, nobody else is moving those schools that historically we have not served well as fast as we are.
I
Just-
understand.
that's fact, right? And so what we're doing is working, but it does take time. Literacy moves slower than anything. And so we're making the right moves. We've got to continue to invest in those things. I don't know where, like, I'm not sure where you're referring to. I'm okay with upping by 6. Our central office staff, you know, if you go to that slide, it's 8% of our overall staffing, which is, again, below the national average. We're committed to cutting 20 more positions from central operations, which would be a 5% reduction in that staff. So I don't know where we're not increasing it at all.
Well, we had this discussion before a couple of years ago, and we had like a 50% increase in admin. How many admin positions that traditionally were in the central office are now centered in the schools? Can you find out a number on that?
Are you talking about people or chairs? Like their
People.
position? People?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're showing you right there the number of people in schools. It's, 4,000. Can't read that now in front of me. I need glasses. 4,708,
Well,
right?
I can go back and get the figures that we've discussed, but
I think what maybe you're asking is the conversation that we were having about assistant principals and student support coaches.
I'm okay with that
Okay.
because, for me, when we approved that before most on this board were on the board, this was to see if this was working. So we needed to give it at least a couple of years. And yes, in some schools, we're having really good actual academic performance increases, especially in some of our schools. Most people wouldn't think that at several of our schools, the Hispanic demographic is in some cases 5 to 10% higher than our black students at the same school. So something is working, but it's distressing. I know all the national average and I know the state average. I know all of this, but I want us to be a heck of a lot better than that. And I don't mean just incrementally.
No, I hear
know
you.
it's a long process.
Yeah. I hear you. We're going there from an achievement standpoint. I want to keep pushing back on the central office though, right? Because we have been transparent and have made adjustments. I told you guys, I think each over a month ago, that we were going to make adjustments. I'm showing you a number tonight that we're committed to getting to. Like we are doing what we said we would do.
Well,
Yeah.
For example, I'll give you one example. Maybe you'll remember this because this was pretty recent. And in fact, it was November or December. We get a grant. And it's a $951,000 grant. And 74% of it went to 4 directors and their administrative assistant.
What grant is that?
I'll have to look, but we approved it either November or December. And I spoke about that then, that another $80,000 in that grant went to the software program that the DOJ, this was a BJA grant, the Bureau of Justice Assistance out of the Department of Justice. It's called a Stop School Violence Grant. And then $15,000 went to instructional materials. Over 84% of that $951,000,
Went to people.
yeah, went
Yeah,
to people
that matches our regular budget.
not in the classroom.
Well, but again, that matches our regular budget of you, and if you're increasing people that are in the classroom, you've seen a trend right there of it increasing at central office and us committing to reducing that, which we are. But I would, if you think about any school system, the vast majority of the budget, I think, what are we at in terms of percentage of our budget? It's like 76% of our budget is people, right? So I mean, that trends with what you would expect.
Okay, well, we haven't had our meeting, and not until tomorrow, so I'll just close. I've already said, discussed more. I need to, I'll ask some more questions when we have
Yes,
our
sir.
meeting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Groen. Good thoughts. Mr. Slater?
Going back to the staffing allocation summary, what, fiscal year 22, 23, 24, was that all still 8%? Was that less than 8%, more than 8%?
It's trended right at that, 8 to 9%, pretty much all 4 years.
Okay. That's the
And,
only
and
question I
again,
had.
that big bump between 23 and 24, that's the staffing model change in the year that TISA was implemented.
If you just look at the slope of the line, though, if you just look at the slope of the line, the blue line, you know what I mean, is just going up at a higher rate than the purple line. So we know that there are more people going into schools than there are in the central office, just in terms of ratios. So the central office is growing at a much smaller rate than the staff at schools are growing.
Felice?
I was just getting back to the teacher student ratio. For one, you know, I feel like our staffing numbers are reasonable, our ratios, and the states to me are terrible. I think, you know, so what we're doing is, I think, what we need to do or better is a good standard, and I don't see how people can even operate a school much with the high ratios that the state has set. So that's my opinion on that.
I see no other questions at this time. Anybody else have any other questions or thoughts? Dr. Robertson, I know we talked a little bit of the timeline, but just to confirm, your hope is to present something to the board from a number perspective. You said in April?
Yeah, first week of April, in terms of like this, that's, 85, 90% cooked. I think we had three versions last year of like, we started with version 1, you guys see it, make some adjustments, version 2, and then what finally passed was version 3. And so in that time, there'll be some changes that we've got to work through. I think there are several things that y'all have asked us to do. Number one is we have some work to do around coaching supplements, and we'll make sure that we get that. We've got to get some work around the conversation of cell phones and estimate for the pouches there. I'm leaving.
Are we allowed to have them walk?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Is the cell phone pouches still a thing given the current, what just passed?
We're not voting on anything Thursday. You were talking about state law?
Yeah, with the new state law, I mean, is that even still a thing? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it could be. You guys, if you change the policy, you just have to be within the boundaries of state law. It doesn't have to match it perfectly. I mean, what we currently have is actually very similar to what passed at the state, but there's nothing that would prevent the board from, having a more restrictive policy. But I think it's within that, and just the request to get more information and waiting to see is why we're not voting on Thursday.
Do you care?
Yeah, nope.
I still need to review it, to be honest with you.
But I believe you're talking about the provision that says it has to be on their person in a state of, be able to access it in an emergency.
Emergency, right.
Right, and so we're gonna need to get clarification on that to see what that would entail. If putting them in a pouch that could only be unlocked by a teacher would violate that or not. And so it's just so new, we don't really know. I think it's still worth us looking into the cost so that you guys are fully prepared. And then looking into that too with Scott and Mary to make sure.
Felice, you had a question?
Yes, and I probably should have noticed this before, but the staffing model projection decreased 2%, 88.5 FTE. Tell me that acronym again.
Full-time equivalent, so it's a
Okay.
full-time position.
Okay, from that first meeting that we had and the list, we got the number. Does that include all the exceptional education assistants?
That's-
Because
Just in the staffing model, I think, like, is that, that's.
Because 88, because the,
If you'll remember from what you first saw, right, that conversation was actually about like people are moving out of the base staffing model into program staffing. So we weren't reducing by that many ex-ed teachers. They were shifting from programs.
right, I understand that was
Yeah.
the licensed teachers. It was from like 58 to 38 that were going to the centralized positions.
Right. So this number takes all of that into account, right? It would be down 88.5 FTE.
Because the number, if I recall, as far as exceptional education assistants, that I believe was going down around 67 or so.
Many of them moving to programs.
Okay, I did
Yes,
not.
you have to remember they're moving
Well,
to programs. It's
I
not
saw
just
the
posters.
ones that were the
Yeah.
regular education, or the
Yeah.
licensed teacher exceptional ed, those. So you're moving a lot of the exceptional ed assistants and.
And to support programs
So
where the
this would
highest
be the
needs are.
total, including all of those assistants.
Yes.
But it's not just that. There's also some CT positions. There's assist or principal position.
Yeah, it's honestly every position we go through in the base staffing model, there are adjustments. If
Okay.
something's not making sense, it's okay, now's the
No,
time.
it's
I
not
think-
that it's not making sense. I just know that a lot of people have been told that they've been let go, some of the assistants, without the option of transferring. So
Well,
I don't know if some
yeah,
of
we've gotta
those
work on
teachers,
that.
I don't know if some of the assistants know that they're being transferred when they've just been let go. In the, that's what
Yeah,
they're
that-
told. They're not being told that, because I know that the classified positions are at the will of the superintendent, and they're not, like the licensed teachers that can transfer. So, I just don't know if this is being made clear to all of the exceptional education assistants as well, who may be transferred.
We have a principals meeting on Wednesday. I've asked Dr. Brown to talk a little bit about the staffing processes, just to clarify. We have a toolkit, but there's some confusion in the field. Ex-Ed is actually having a conversation as well related to the timeline. So that doesn't solve everything, but I think us just getting better at our messaging, more clear about the expectations and what the process is. So yes, there's been some confusion. We're still working to make sure that it's more and more clear.
Okay, that's where the confusion was. I knew a lot of the licensed teachers were being relocated, but I didn't know about the exceptional ed assistants.
Absolutely, it's both, yeah.
And based on what I've been hearing as far as, what they've been informed or not informed of yet. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Felice. Mr. Groom?
No. No, thank you.
Okay. So I know when we met as a board at our retreat, we talked a little bit. One of the activities that Shannon helped facilitate was priorities and kind of what's important to us. And I'll be the first to tell you, and I think we're all on the same page on this, that this is a year where we may not be able to do as many things as we would like to do for the kids and the teachers, and that's just the reality of where we are. But our position as a board member is to listen to our community and listen to the teachers in our district and try to be a liaison for them and what's important. So if anybody wanted to maybe reiterate or talk about any priorities that they would hope to see, obviously now would be a great time to do that before it's finalized in totality. I see one, Mrs. Schaefer.
I'm just going to speak, we've talked about it many times, the base model. I've been asked that we not have to have the social worker and counselor and seed, but maybe either or in the base, and then allow them to hire that back in the strategic funding should each school request or want to do so. So that's what I've been asked to advocate for, and that's what I'm going to do.
Thanks.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's an interesting question, because I think we all can agree there's not a one-size-fits-all model. I mean, every school is different across our county, all unique. That, within that theory, and Ms. Schaefer, what you're suggesting is those positions would essentially be supplemental, right, in terms of under the strategic staffing model, so that principals at each respective school could make it their discretion in how they allocate, let's call it that revenue, based off what they feel they need in their school. So there very well could be a majority of the schools say, hey, we want to keep counselors, we want to keep social workers, we want to keep the seed employees, whereas another school may say, you know, we don't really have enough work for the seed coach. I'd rather allocate that to an RTI or another education assistant, something to that effect. Has there been consideration to that type of approach?
From this board, there has, and I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, my stance, and I go back to experience of what has happened in this county. There's got to be a balance of, you can call it consistency, you could call it coherence. There's got to be a balance of that with flexibility, right? And that's what we've tried to do in this staffing model, is say, you know, here are some things that we hold to be consistent, right? And part of it has been these three positions. It's our belief that if you look after the well-being of kids, that the academics will follow, and you're seeing some of that. The flexibility comes in the strategic staffing, which again, before 2 years ago, there's never been a staffing model that allowed this much flexibility for schools and for principals. And so we're kind of balancing that. To me, the three positions were designed to work together to address student needs and teacher needs. I think oftentimes these get caught up in just about kids, but they're not. You hear me say a lot, 2 ways to address teacher satisfaction, in my opinion. And research backs up some of this, but it's wages and then working conditions. And part of the working conditions is setting up these three positions to support them, but also to support kids that have barriers. One thing that we're working on that we don't have it yet, but I think it helps, is by laying out what those three positions are meant to do. Dr. Stewart and her team are working on that, so I'll let her talk.
We have it. I just don't have it for you, but I'll have it on Thursday night, where we do some role clarification, because the roles are really actually very distinct. The licensing is different. What they can do with kids, what they can do with families, what they can do with teachers is very unique. And so for you all to see it next to each other, because they're not functioning the same way. And so to the point Dr. Robertson made about a care team, I think this speaks to that. The other thing I think I want to say here is that sometimes we look at these three positions and we think they're about behavior reduction, but I think about, you were the one that brought out like the anxious generation, right? I think that's the title of that book. There are so many of our kids right now who have varying levels of need, right? And so it's pushing towards helping every single one of our kids be successful in the classroom. So it's more than just misbehavior. I just want to say that. It's more than misbehavior. It's how do we create the conditions for every single kid, no matter what they bring to school, to be successful in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to help the teachers and equip these kids. I think what Jody's pointing out to, and I would tend to agree with her, is, you know, I think principals, and we do this through the strategic staffing model, but to my earlier point, every school is different. Every school has different caseloads, different needs within those kids, within the communities, and allowing those principals to have the autonomy within a budget to designate how they feel certain positions should be allocated, as opposed to all or nothing, as I believe the way it is today. I think there's something of benefit to that. We're going to move on. I'm going to go to Felice. I'm going to go to Jill. Go ahead, Felice.
Okay, this is something that I brought up in previous meetings as well. And I believe every position has value. You know, they're all, you know, valuable. But I think the needs are different in different schools. So we may argue that every school has to have all three of those positions, but I've talked to quite a few principals and staff And I'm hearing that they don't all need all positions, all of these positions. So my thought is if a principal doesn't need all three or one or the other, why can't we keep another teacher, let them decide how they want to use, some of their funds? If they don't think they need one of those positions, why, can't they have an extra exceptional education teacher or a regular education teacher, or maybe they really need another counselor? But our school district is very diverse in a lot of ways, and the needs are differently. So, I just wish we weren't mandating those positions when they're not needed in every school based on what I've heard.
So, and I understand new boards change priorities. 2 years ago, we had a board that approved a strategic plan that really, a lot of ways, the foundation of it is looking at the well-being of our kids and the well-being of our teachers as a cornerstone of success. Our staffing model is actually a instrument developed alongside that strategic plan to actually help us execute on that strategic plan. I think if this is the conversation we are having, it is much more than just a finance conversation. It's a strategic initiative, strategic plan conversation. From what I said from the beginning is, I'll go back even 2008. When I came to this district in 2008, I used to say we were a district made of schools, not a school district, meaning very little coherence, very little consistency, and you cannot operate successfully that way as a district our size. You have to have coherence. You have to have consistency. But I also know that flexibility is super important, right? And so when we introduced this staffing model alongside our strategic plan, it was a true balance of saying, here's what the board believes and the administration believes will help us be successful. That's the base model, right? We actually could operate schools just on the base model. Like, we would be in compliance, full compliance, just using the base model. But what we also said, and 2 years ago the boards believed and implemented, is that we need to push as many resources right to schools. So we're pushing $40 million in strategic funds right to schools, right? And so I am more than willing to have this conversation, but it also is a conversation about what we value as a district and if those things still hold true. We could absolutely balance this budget tomorrow by making some other decisions, right? If we didn't value flexibility, we could pull the 40 million back from strategic funding and have a more than balanced budget. But I don't know that that's what we want to do, right? If we don't believe in these three positions, we could pull the funding back from 1.5 of them and balance this budget and just say, schools, you pick, what do you want, a counselor or a social worker or a student support coach? But that wasn't the design. We're almost creating a Frankenstein of a staffing model and a strategic plan. So if we want to go that way, I mean, I think it's something that we should do. And if we want to have it as part of a budget conversation, we need to really think about what our priorities are and if those are going to match our budget.
Yeah, to be clear, no one's calling to remove it. They're just having a discussion around principals' discretion and how it's used. It's still there, and if it's working, and the adoption should stay at 100%.
I think the point I'm trying to make, though, is it's slippery slope, right? Of, like, think about our ELA curriculum. So 15 years ago, some schools were allowed to say, I don't want these textbooks. Instead, send me the dollars that the district would have spent on the textbooks, which creates a level of inconsistency and a lack of coherence across the district, right? And so what I'm saying is I know I went extreme of saying we can pull it back and balance the budget, but I am making the point of these things work together. The three positions work within the base model that is an instrument designed to help schools execute on a strategic plan that the board approved.
Understood.
Can
Mrs.
I add
Black?
can I add just one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we were looking at data to show us success in this space, we would be looking at leading and lagging, right? The leading data would be around attendance and around behavior, right? Is daily attendance going up in our schools? Is chronic absenteeism going down in our schools? Are kids having fewer incidents of misbehavior? And the answer to all those data points is yes. And so when kids are coming to school more and they're better situated in the classroom, learning will come. And we've seen little bits of learning, but you can expect that we are going to continue to go in that direction. So from a data standpoint, I would say the things that we would be looking for to say these positions are critical in the buildings are things like that, and the data follows it.
Understood. Mrs. Black?
That was actually kind of part of my question was like, what kind of data can we examine to see what this investment has gotten us? But also understanding that when we talked about, my first year on the board, my very first budget vote was when we changed the staffing model. And when we were having the conversations about what was changing about the staffing model, what was needed, of course, it was 2022. And so the spring of 2022, or no, 2023. But it was at the end of, you know, this big event that we saw cracks, it expanded cracks in the system that were already there, right? Like we already had an issue with, you know, mental health and it not being addressed because we didn't have the support staff to do it, or, you know, absenteeism or whatever. And all of those things got worse during COVID, and it kind of like exploded, like it expanded what was already there, right? These investments were strategically done to provide a staffing infrastructure that focused on child well-being so that the teachers could go back to focusing on student achievement. Because what I kept hearing from people is we're being asked to do things that we don't know how to do, that's outside of our, like we're being asked to address behaviors that's beyond just regular classroom management. We're being asked to do all these things that we don't feel qualified to do, and we don't have enough time to teach. And so part of the investment that we made in that well-being staff structure was to have people in place who could help address the needs of the kids and also relieve the pressure on the teachers. And it addressed both of those issues at the same time. And so if we could see the data, I think, you know, it's only been in place, this would be like 2 years, right? And so we're going to see a little bit of data, but that's not really very much time to see if it works. But data points to that this is working. And if we're heading in the right direction and we're finally addressing issues that have always existed, and we're finally making headway on issues that we haven't made headway on in the past, the question is, do we want to step back from that when it's working? And what do we want to provide our kids? And the point of having a base staff model is we think that every kid in Hamilton County deserves access to these things and has these things in place so that we're not put in a position where, you know, bigger schools have more resources and then the smaller schools don't have access at all to some of these other things because their student numbers aren't big enough for them to be able to buy it. That we say that these things are important to just exist for every kid in Hamilton County. And after our budget meeting, I did ask for some of this data so that we could see what our investment is doing, and if it's working and we're going in the right direction, we need to ask ourselves, do we really want to pull back now when we're finally making some headway on issues that have always existed?
Yeah. We look forward to the data. Mrs. Thomas?
My question is, Jody and Felice, when you all talks about principals, how many principals are we talking about that would like to do their own thing? Is it just one principal you're talking to? Two, what does that look like when you all say people are saying they don't necessarily need those positions? You know, is it your whole district? If it's just one principal, what does that look like?
I'll just say multiple principals, some one all, some, and the others are, that I've talked to, it's like one or the other or here and there. And the thing is, you know, I think as far as flexibility, it would be nice for the principals to have that flexibility in what they need in their school. And also for smaller schools, they would still have the choice to be able to maintain all of those positions if they need them. But another point is that, you know, a few years ago when we got the ESSER grant per year, you know, we had the money to supply all of these positions. So I'm not saying these positions aren't good or valuable, but we're in a very tough season with the budget, needing to cut a lot of positions. So why are we just so sure that we want to keep these positions and are willing to cut others? Why can't we let the principal decide that? Our needs when COVID were greater, I think, because students were working from home. They weren't being socialized, and I think the needs were much greater. Not that we don't have needs now, but I just think that we're in a different season, and the money is gone for that grant that was helping us with all of these issues, and we had to make very hard choices. So it's not a matter of not valuing certain positions, because they are all valuable, but it's like where to cut, and you know, that's the problem. So I think it should be maybe based on the needs, you know, in each school, because some schools may need it all, so it's great, you know, keep it all in your strategic funds.
I just think though, in asking that question, I say that because just from my experience, I just kind of think for me, I would look at it as to be naive to think that a counselor, a social worker, or a C coach would not benefit the well-being of children in those schools. And so, I mean, and I understand you're not suggesting that you get rid of them, that the principal has a choice. I understand that. But I was just wondering, is it just 5 principals versus 55 principals, and are we trying to make a change because 5 principals may not be satisfied with it or whatever? And I too know that we have to make cuts. I understand that wherever it is, but here we are also talking about giving raises to coaches. So we have to decide where are our priorities when we even look at that. I agree, maybe they are being underpaid, but is this the time to want to research it and give them raises? So I just think our priorities should be, if we're really talking about cutting positions, why are we increasing salaries of certain people? Because it's something they choose to do. I mean, you don't have to coach. You don't have to do all that. I just think we need to clearly, if we're going to do what we say are in the best interest of children, we need to look at all of that when we're talking about adding increases as well as decreasing different things. And I don't have an objection if a principal says they don't want something. They may not want it, but they may very well need it. And I guess for me, that's what I look at.
Mrs. Jones.
If the administrator of the school, if this did come up and they were eligible to opt out, I guess, from not having the seat, like, are they able to opt back in when they realize it, or do they? And I know this sounds. I mean, I know the answer to this. I think I'm just asking. And I'm asking that because I know with other support positions like this, when we fund them or outside entities fund them, and especially if outside entities fund them and support them, and they opt out, they lose it. Like, it's just no longer support for them, right? Because that outside entity moves that to another location to support another school. And then all of a sudden, the administrator realizes, oh, I need this. But then it's gone. I guess my question is to my peers, maybe not to y'all, but to go back to these administrators and say, hey, you may feel this way now. In the event, in the future, if you're eligible to opt out of this and you turn around and need it, but you filled it somewhere else, what is your plan for supporting these kids, these students? And I'm saying that because having lived the decision to get here, because it was, like Jill said, a lot of, I can't deal with this, my staff can't, they're just, they teachers, I just want to teach, I don't want to do this, I'm not equipped for this is overwhelming for me. And it was even, honestly, a lot of this discussion came pre-COVID. And so I guess I'm saying, I would love to know, or if you all could go back to those staff and just kind of get a feel for what is the plan B if they are, what are you okay with this, knowing that if this happens, you don't get to go back, like this is what you elected to do. And so at this point, you have to support that. And I guess most recently there's been some concerns with some schools, I know in Jody's district, well, I can't deal with this, I don't know, I can't handle this. Well, if you elect to lose that position that could support that, what does that look like in your school? And so that's just a big concern for me, because I don't have them issues in my schools, because my schools in District 5, we love all 3 of our care team people. We need them and some extras. So I don't have this concern, but I do think if there's something to consider, I would just love to know, what their thoughts are on understanding you don't get to go back. And so how do you expect, because I don't want them to come back to Dr. Robinson and his team like, we need help. And I'm like, in his defense, I'm gonna be like, he gave you help and you opted out.
Well, I can answer the question, if I may. Because I taught high school for 20 years and never had a seed coach. Not that they're not valuable. I know it would have been nice to have them. They are valuable. But one of the best things that we had was in school suspension, a place that if the behavior was too distracting for the teacher to teach, they had in school suspension, and teachers would send their work and maybe even go tutor them some, as I did during their planning. So there was a place that is an alternative. It might not be as good as, and I'm sure it's not as good as having a seat coach. But when you're having to make choices between an exceptional education teacher or a seed coach, you can make do. And in school suspension was very helpful in that particular situation.
Thanks, please. I'm going to go to Mr. Groen.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make 2 observations. One is, last year we had 5 in-school suspension. We had a pilot program, there were 5. This year we have 17.
Yeah, I don't, are you talking about like Choice Academy? Is that what you're talking
No,
about?
I'm not talking about Choice Academy. I'm talking about, we now have 17 teachers for behavioral management. We had 5 last year, we have 17 this year.
I don't know about the pilot, but this goes to the strategic dollars, that if schools felt like they needed more behavior support, which you're saying we went from 5 to 17, that means 12 additional schools
Right.
felt like they needed behavior support.
And then we've got, the Edgenuity support staff in each of our high schools. And that's additional support at various schools. And that's working with, and I could criticize that program, but if I know it worked for a lot of kids the last 2 or 3 years at my school. In terms of what we pay our coaches, having experienced it myself, coaching in my career as I went through various schools, and now really having I go to so many athletic events, it's interesting that my wife puts up with it. But these coaches, good heavens, we don't pay them enough. The amount of time, the sacrifices they make with their own family to do this. Yes, it's a passion, they choose to do it. But, you know, when you're working really hard to get funding to transport kids around, you're going out and getting donations to feed these kids. You make sure everyone gets home, even if you have to do it yourself. I mean, these individuals, like many of our staff in the schools and elsewhere, this is a passion for them. And yeah, we need to think about increasing their compensation if this has been going on since 1997. That's just my opinion. And you can take it that or leave it, but you need to at least go out, visit practices, go to a lot of games, talk to a lot of coaches, and you'll find you'll be very amazed. And Dr. Robinson, I know that you're aware because of your time as a principal. You know how much time is put into it. So it's just, yeah, if we're going to compensate teachers like we've done 2 years ahead of time,
Hey Shirley,
I think
if you can hear me, I'd like,
You got it, Gary. Come
yeah,
your
go
way.
ahead, go ahead.
Thanks,
Gary.
Mr. Grown. Let me go to Felice, then Jody, and then we'll round it out with Gary.
thank you.
Okay, as far as principals maybe needing more that year than what they thought, I know that most contracts are for a year, so it's probably a year-to-year thing as far as the answer. I don't know if they could change any of that or not. Another thing is that counselors have always been very helpful as far as they actually have degrees in counseling, so they work with students who have issues, and we might need more counselors to help them. Another idea I have as far as working with teachers with their behavior management is maybe center some professional development sessions around behavior management in the classroom, but that's just one idea. And also, I think it would be good sometime in whatever school may be in your zone to even visit some of the schools and see what they're doing in some of their classes, as far as I'm thinking especially in exceptional education, and just seeing how valuable they are and how challenging those roles can be in working with students with disabilities.
Mrs. Schaefer?
I just want to say that those positions are very valuable. I'm not saying they're not. I just want to give principals the option to choose, the discretion to choose what's best for their schools' needs. I've also said that seed coaches make good athletic coaches. And because I have asked for the numbers for the athletic stipends, you know, you talked about how these positions were a strategic plan of the board before some of us came on. Increasing the athletics would also be part of that strategic plan, because we know that athletics and giving a child a coach, because a good coach is more than just the time on the field.
Yep.
They invest in that child's life. And we know that giving children the athletic piece, and a successful athletic piece, gives them purpose, it gives them something to enjoy, something to look forward to. And a child who has nothing to lose is what we don't want. So this is just a part of that strategic plan like you talked about.
Can I say one thing, Felice, to your comment? Half of the seed coaches are former ex-ed teachers. That was one of the things we did not anticipate. And so to the point of needing extra supports for a specific student group, it's right at 50%. We were shocked that that was what the choice was. And so, again, you know kind of the skills of that teacher. They know de-escalation, they know classroom management, they know how to create systems, you know, that are, you know, create the behaviors that we want to see. And so just to the point that our seed coaches, about half of them
I would just
are ex-ed.
argue for them to be in the classroom regularly with the students and work with them.
But they're often coaching teachers to help them. They're more expansive, is my point. Yeah, yeah.
Gary?
Thank you. So I've been taking notes, and I'll put all my thoughts kind of in one thing, and then I'll be quiet again. So I like what Jackie said. I cannot support pay rate. I love coaches, and they're such an important part of our school system, but I can't support pay raises when we're going to be cutting bodies. And I mean, we're talking 88 and 20, 108. But I do think Steve Slater had mentioned something that might help there to lower some, bring some money down, and that's to look at the sports levels, the 1A through 5A, and look at how many coaches there are in each. And, I agree with him that a 5A team doesn't need 10 or might need 10, but a 1A team with, 1/3 the number of players don't need 10. So that we might be able to look at that and save some there. But the third thing, which really maybe this isn't the time to bring it up. These are tough choices, but we've got even tougher choices next year. I know talking with my commissioner and then talking to Mary Ellen. So this is an appraisal year for property tax. We know the county, so if you haven't heard, we get, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Ellen, we get roughly 2.23% of property tax right now. Correct?
No,
That's the village.
yeah, that's the millage rate. I mean,
Millage rate, yeah, okay, that's what, and so because of new builds and that, Marty Haynes, to make it easier on taxpayers, the housing goes up, the number of houses we've had 31,000 new builds in this county, and because of that, there's going to be a proposal to lower our millage rate to roughly 1.5. So, we're gonna have to talk to our if that happens at the end of this year, for next year, next budget season, we're talking about even bigger cuts than what we're talking now. But just wanted you to be aware of that. But, the last opinion, the staffing model is really, it was out of the box thinking that all I can speak for is in my district. In my district, it has been a wonderful thing. The administrators have liked having that autonomy. We can't control what the state has done, and one thing, it's a lot of these positions that we're looking at have come because the state raised, well, especially the CTE, state raised CTE ratios from 1 to 22 per teacher to 1 to 25 per teacher. So as I explained to somebody that asked me about that, if you have 90 students, then you would have had 5 teachers to cover those 90 students in CTE class. But now if you have 90 students with the new thing, you're only going to have 4 teachers needed to cover those students in CTE class because they've raised it. And so, there's some things we're having to do not because of lack of money in that from our own programs and stuff, but because of, what the state's going to be providing us. But, again, I just wanted to share a few of my opinions and let you be aware that this is after this year, we have an appraisal year coming up for the property tax, the millage rate. And as Mary Ellen told us, we couldn't count on sales tax. They didn't come in anywhere near where we expected, and unless inflation goes down, I don't think people are going to spend any more than, they're not going to spend like what they did. So, and that's all. I'll shut up.
Thanks, Gary. Good perspective. Mr. Slater.
I'll hurry so Ben doesn't cut me off. For the record, I didn't bring up anything about the sports or the coaches supplements or anything. But I do want to say this. Besides my parents, nobody left a bigger impression on me than my coaches. Not teachers, not administrators, not the guidance counselors. It was my coaches who made me pretty much what I am right now. And I just want to say that, how important it is for these athletic coaches and what they mean to most of these kids that play ball.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it clear, what we're being asked to do is basically look at what is a percentage based on salary to turn it into a flat rate that isn't based on salary, that's based on the position, right? And so raise may be the wrong term. There actually may be some that we have to grandfather in because they're making more than what we would end up on. And the adjustments of what we've talked about earlier of maybe based on student size to coaches, I think it will cost us a little bit, but I don't know that I would characterize it as a raise. I would characterize it as basically like putting a scale in place that isn't based on a percentage. So right now, you know, you get a percentage based on what you're making, and so you know, someone at the end of the scale makes a lot more than someone that's been here for 2 or 3 years. But what I hear from earlier comments is we're trying to set a system up that makes us more competitive to hire good coaches. So it may not cost us money, is my point.
Thank you, Justin. I think that's it for the comments for the time being. Dr. Robertson, I want to just say, and we all know this, but it's worth echoing. You know, this is the challenge you have in public education. You've got a finite amount of resources, and you've got a very individualistic need as far as each kid, and it's hard. It's very hard. There's no perfect recipe for this. Nobody has the right playbook to do this 100% accurate. Everybody's trying to figure it out. But I think it's helpful and healthy that we as a board can have a discussion about it, and I think that's bodes well for our future on this board for, you know, however many years that is. So I just appreciate your receptiveness on your team. Appreciate the input from everybody up here. Everybody's fighting for what they feel is important for their community and their teachers and their schools. And there's a balance that's going to be had at the end of all this, and I look forward to what that balance is, and hopefully coming out stronger next year, knowing where we need to be and where we can be. And so anyway, I think for that, unless there's any other questions, comments, anybody else?
May I take one? I just wanted to introduce Lindsay Sapiro. Just, you had mentioned her as our purchasing director, so I just want to let you know she was here today. We're going to leave you with a copy of our purchasing manual and a kind of a little one-pager that just talks about the process, just to kind of answer some questions that were there. So I just wanted to, since she had joined us today, make sure you'd seen her face. She does a great job for us. We appreciate her keeping this straight, but we'll leave this with little take-homes for you.
Thank you for coming, Lindsay. All right, with that, we are adjourned.
Great job, Ken. Thank you.
Keep it on.